What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we have the wide receiver start and sits for week 7. We're getting into that part of the season where injuries are starting to stack up. We have bye weeks. In fact, 4 teams are on bye, and each of them have at least one wide receiver in the top 24, which is why making the right start is very important. So if you are unsure of who to start between 2 players, feel free to utilize the rankings available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. The link for that is in the description box below. But we have loads of other information on the site too. We have the Vegas Pick'em model that's operating at 64%, which is insane. Trade targets to help you boost your team, as well as loads of articles. So if that does interest you, check that link in the description. But we have to get right into it. There are plenty of matches to go over, and the first one we have today is the Eagles versus Dallas. So an NFC showdown with some very fantasy relevant players. We have Alshon Jeffrey for the Eagles, Zach Ertz, Amari Cooper, and Michael Gallup. We should definitely start with Dallas because the big news, of course, is Amari Cooper. He was injured. He has a quad injury, and it does not appear at this time that he's leaning towards playing, which is very unfortunate. This would be one of his better matchups of the entire season. The Eagles' pass defense, it's pitiful. Ezekiel Elliott, he may not be as effective just due to the Eagles' strong front 7, which would really force Dak to have to throw the ball, and the Eagles' potent offense is definitely going to keep the Cowboys in a position where they're going to have to continue to put points on the board. The news does appear as if he is not trending towards suiting up. If he does not, Michael Gallup, he's going to be the obvious boost in production, but there's other players that would likely get a trickle-down effect when it comes to potential increased targets. You have Jason Witten. Randall Cobb, if he suits up, more targets to the backfield. So Gallup, we do have him as a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. One thing I do want you guys to be aware of, though, is just the limitations of Dak. He always is as good as the sum of his parts. You know, when he gets Zeke in the lineup, he plays much better. Amari Cooper, of course, instant upgrade to Dak's overall performance. So losing a big important piece like that, if Michael Gallup somehow doesn't step up in a big way and make the plays when they're needed, same with the rest of the other guys, there is a potential for Dak to be the limiting factor. So be mindful of that. But let's talk the Eagles. Alshon Jeffrey, 12 targets, catching 10 of them, even reaching the end zone. We haven't seen consistent performances like that from Jeffrey for quite some time, but now this is 3 weeks in a row where he's had at least 8 targets, and getting double digits, it does bode well for the confidence that we can place in him. Unfortunately, it's a bad matchup. Dallas, they're not flashy, but they don't make many mistakes. They know the Eagles offense very well. However, a back-end wide receiver 2, if that's the type of production that you're expecting from him in your lineup, then he should be able to deliver. This game itself has a 49-point over-under that is tied for second highest of the entire week. So there's definitely a chance he reaches the end zone again. So let's just move right into the next matchup, which is the Dolphins versus the Bills, and it's expected to be a blowout. Bills are at home, and they're 17-point favorites. Now, Patriots do get credit for having the best defense, but the Bills have had a bit of a tougher schedule, and their numbers are not that far off from the Patriots, so I do give them a lot of respect, and they're facing the Dolphins, so it should be a bloodbath, and that's going to help the running back position a little bit more than it's going to help the receiver position. This style of offense, though, it's built off of big plays, explosiveness, so John Brown, he's likely going to have one of his better games, so long as he can get the production early. Ryan Fitzpatrick will be starting, and his range of outcomes, he could pass for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, which would be great, but he could also have 2 pick sixes in the first quarter, which could impact the type of production he could get in the later stages of the game. But even so, 1 half should be more than enough for him to get the points that he needs. They are one of the worst pass defenses and defenses in total in the entire league, so John Brown should not have any trouble getting open, and as long as Josh Allen can connect, you can expect wide receiver 2 numbers from John Brown in this matchup and potentially push for even more than that. And that's basically it for this entire game. You don't want anyone else on the Bills, nobody else on Miami. And what we have next is the Jags versus the Bengals. I really wanted to say DJ Chark was a sit against this defense, which is extremely underrated. They're really weak against running backs, but when it comes to the pass, there really hasn't been a ton of upside. They haven't exactly faced the best passing offenses. I know they had Lamar Jackson recently, the Steelers without Ben, but Kyler Murray had trouble, and he's been playing pretty consistently. David Johnson led that game in receiving yards, so it could be a difficult matchup, but DJ Chark, he looks pretty unstoppable, so I couldn't even be too harsh on him. You're gonna start him. He's in the back half of the top 20 still. Had this been a good matchup, he would likely be ranked higher. Westbrook, on the other hand, I would rather not, but we are at the point where there are a lot of receivers on bye, and every player is going to move up because of that, and sometimes you're not going to be getting a lot of options. So he is in that flex range. I personally would try to target a different matchup. Reason being, the Jags are heavy home favorites. That always bodes much better for the running back position, and Leonard Fournette is touching the ball more than almost any other running back in the league, not named McCaffrey. Then we're talking they're playing the Bengals, who are one of the weakest rush defenses. So Leonard Fournette, while he's not the most efficient running back historically, could have one of those games where he's just completely dominant and the Bengals may not be able to do anything about it. And if it's working and they're running a lot, less time on the clock, less plays. So there's a lot of factors why starting a receiver on that team is not going to be the biggest upside play, especially when it comes to Westbrook. For Cincy, it's a tough matchup. Fortunately though, Jalen Ramsey is not on the team, so that's one less problem that they have to deal with. But the Jaguars' strength, it's definitely more leaning towards stopping the pass over the run. So players like Boyd, we saw what happened when he faced a good cornerback in Marlon Humphreys last week. It did open up opportunities for Auden Tate, who's taken over for John Ross, and over the past 2 games has 18 targets, 12 of which did come from last game. So don't expect that type of volume to continue. That was probably more a product of the strong coverage on Boyd. But what it does say is that they do have a capable receiver that they're not afraid to pump full of targets, which is good for fantasy. We also know Boyd had some of his best games with a capable receiver also in the lineup. So this could be a good thing in more ways than one. But as for this matchup, low over under, defense's strength is against this position. That's more of a low end wide receiver 2 this week. Auden Tate, he is in flex consideration this week, especially if those targets get pushed over from tough coverage on Boyd. So that's always a possibility. Let's move into the next matchup, Vikings versus Lions. You have Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, and Kirk Cousins had one heck of a game to say the least, his best by far this season. But before we start anointing him as the Kirk Cousins of Washington, where he's going to be throwing that much, you have to understand it was against the Eagles. Even though they are a run-first team, you'd be pretty silly to stick to that game plan 100% against one of the league's best front sevens and risk the player who's really making this whole system operate efficiently, Dalvin Cook, put him at risk as well. So it was game plan specific. So before we go gung-ho over Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen and a resurgence like we saw at the early parts of last season, let's pump the brakes a little bit, especially in a tough divisional matchup against Detroit, who has been playing very physical this season. You also have Slay to deal with. I don't think there's any way you're benching Thielen, though. He is going to be in the wide receiver 1 conversation again this week. Diggs does present a bit more risk, and just knowing his range of outcomes, they're a little bit wide, and what should be a much different matchup than what we saw for the past 2 weeks. Now, Golladay and Marvin Jones, they have consistently performed to exactly expectations and performed nearly exactly when he should. And that's really all we can ask for from our players. The worst thing is when they're performing well in the bad matchups and then in the good matchups, they don't seem to get it done. So why do I mention that? Well, this one, it is a bad matchup. Even with Galladay's impressive target share, there's just not enough offense to really go around for him. There's a 43.5 point projected total, and with Minnesota expected to win this game, you can do the math. Detroit's not projected to put a ton of points on the board, and then you have Minnesota, who's top 5 in nearly every category for past several years when it comes to pass defense, and this year is no exception. Marvin Jones, though, he has found success. However, you know the drill with him. You're not starting him as anything more than a flex, and typically in the games where I'm trying to start a flex, I always look for upside, and this matchup doesn't scream upside. You know, when he was playing Kansas City, that was a completely different story. So when I'm targeting a guy who's a little bit risky, has that upside, I'm looking for players, high projected point totals, signs for increased opportunity, and maybe going against a weak spot of the opposing team's defense. He has none of those, so he could hit, likely not, but play him at your own risk. For the Raiders versus the Packers, it's really tough to make out what's going to happen in this game. It does have one of the higher over-unders of the week. However, there aren't really any receivers that are healthy. I mean, Packers are going to be without Adams, likely MVS, and Allison, which will open up opportunities for Allen Lazard, who had Aaron Rodgers talking him up. Typically when Aaron Rodgers speaks up and he says something, he usually means it. Just a few examples I can think of. You have most recently with Devontae Adams heading into the Philly game, Aaron Jones last year needing to get the ball more, and then even dating back as far as RELAX. So wouldn't be surprised if Allen Lazard has one heck of a game. We have him ranked inside the top 20. It's difficult outside of that to really predict exactly how this passing offense is going to function. If you want to take a glory shot, by all means, but I can't even say with certainty Jimmy Graham is a stone cold lock. But a tight end that is a lock, you have Darren Waller, who has been getting a monstrous amount of targets for a tight end. And with Tyrell not seeing the field for the second week in a row, don't feel obligated to try to get a piece of this game. Most people don't really think about it, but Green Bay is one of the stronger teams versus the pass. And with Derek Carr and inexperienced weapons, it's not really a place that I'm going out of my way to try to get a piece of. If you want offense, you really don't have to look any further than the Atlanta Falcons versus the LA Rams. It should be a shootout. We have a 54.5 point over-under, and the Falcons' defense is just pitiful. Expect an offensive showdown, which means virtually every player is startable. On the Rams, we know the passing funnel does favor Woods, Cooks, and Cooper Kupp. Kupp is slowly taken over as the number one receiver, which is slightly hurting the safety of the other two that you used to have, but the upside is always going to be there, and these are the type of matchups that you're going to see it firsthand. Julio Jones, top 5 as always. Austin Hooper, he's been nothing short of incredible. Definitely a TE1. Calvin Ridley, players whose production's not a guarantee every week. The games you want to use them and try to fit them in your lineup are the ones that have the high over-unders, the ones where there's going to be a lot of offense, and that's this game. So look forward to putting him in your lineup. He is a wide receiver 2 this week. But if you're unsure who to start over him or if he's the right choice, definitely utilize the rankings available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Texans versus Colts, and I'm really excited to see this matchup. These two teams always play each other very well. Both of these offenses really know how to play against these defenses. T.Y. Hilton historically has had some of his best games against Houston. DeAndre Hopkins, this would likely be his opportunity to reach the end zone for the first time since week 1. So he's a clear wide receiver 1. We even have to bump up Will Fuller. So mid-range wide receiver 2 for him. T.Y. Hopkins, both wide receiver 1s. A lot of potential in this matchup, but no need to really go too far into that. An interesting matchup with 2 rookie quarterbacks we have is the Cardinals versus the Giants. Believe it or not, this is the highest over-under of the week, and that's just a combination of how bad these defenses are and the return of Saquon Barkley and Evan Engram, which are immediately going to boost this offense of the Giants. Do follow the health of Sterling Shepard. That is going to directly impact the value of Slayton if you were in some situation where you were forced to have to put him in. Golden Tate, he did have a day. Just be mindful, he's on 6 targets, and while that could increase as they become more accustomed to playing with each other, but I would much more lean on the side that it is going to get crowded. Imagine the return of Evan Engram, and then you have Sterling Shepard, who is limited in practice, but is in no way ruled out to play. If he comes back, having already played with Daniel Jones, it's just much more likely that Golden Tate won't be receiving an increase in volume. 6 targets is not a lot to match, but with Saquon Barkley being one of the best pass-catching backs in the entire league, there's going to be a lot of options for Daniel Jones on Sunday. As for the Cards, you know the guys, mostly the backfield, but you also have Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. Once again, Larry Fitzgerald getting our respect. More of a PPR guy, 6 receptions, 69 yards. Not going to jump off the board at you. But the fact that he gets a soft matchup again, we can't throw everything out just because he didn't show maximum upside. So he's going to be ranked as a high-end wide receiver too. And with his receiving floor, he's a pretty safe guy to put in your lineup. He'll be much more safe than Christian Kirk, who very well could suit up. If he does, you could flex him for sure, but you know what you're getting yourself into. It's a risky endeavor, but don't bother with anybody else. So we'll move on to the next one, which is San Francisco versus Washington. And it's pretty basic here. You only have McLaurin to start. Now, McLaurin, he's been performing wonderfully. You have to start him every week, even in a tough matchup like San Francisco is, who are still a bit underrated. They had that good game against the Browns, which really got everyone to notice how well this team is playing. But I don't think many people consider them a top 10 passing defense, which is exactly what they are. So this will definitely be a test for McLaurin. We have him as a sell high, reluctant sell high. And for San Francisco, George Kittle, that's about it. Chargers and Titans though, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Allen should be started every week regardless of matchup. And while the Titans' pass defense is a bit underrated, they are also trending downward. Mike Williams, on the other hand, he has been very involved in this offense, and even more so as of late. We know what kind of ability he has in the red zone, and although Hunter Henry has returned dominantly, he's still a big play option. In fact, I understand Travis Benjamin's there, but seems to be the team's first option when it comes to big plays. So starting him, despite the production that we've seen over the past few weeks, is not a bad idea whatsoever. So Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 3. Titans are starting Ryan Tannehill, which could have an impact on this offense. I don't think for the total production, but when we saw Ryan Tannehill play, he targeted Jarvis Landry very heavily. Marcus Mariota never really targeted any receiver with enough consistent volume to make anyone fantasy relevant. There is that potential with Ryan Tannehill. Who that will be, unlikely to know. Maybe Adam Humphries fits kind of a similar role, but there's really no saying at this point, and the Chargers' pass defense is one of the best in the league. So to take a gamble would be completely silly, but definitely something to monitor. Seattle versus the Ravens, and we lost Will Dissly, who was a surprise fantasy asset this season, so it is very unfortunate, but also opens up some opportunities for other receivers. DK Metcalf is one person you would think, that being a big-bodied guy like himself, but also Tyler Lockett would likely be the main beneficiary just because he doesn't need a lot of volume to produce. 4 targets is enough for his wide receiver 2/1 production each week, and if he gets more, it's not like his efficiency is likely to go down because of it. Look forward to him. Just a slight bump, but definitely something that does increase his value. And bouncing back to DK Metcalf, we saw last week Marlon Humphrey shadowed Tyler Boyd, which forced Andy Dalton to have to target the wide receiver 2 in this offense a lot more. Could that be something that we see with Baltimore again this week? And will that affect Russell Wilson the same way? Possibly. It's something that we do have to be aware of as a range of outcomes. Who that next man up likely would be with no Dissly, that would be DK Metcalf. So if you are trying to flex him, I would say he does have a little bit more upside than he typically does. Just because if you think about it, there is a scenario where there's no Lockett targetable and now no Dissly, making DK the first viable read being targeted by a quarterback who's on an MVP run. So we're not here to promote him as this super sleeper or anything. We don't have him ranked as anything more than a mid-range wide receiver 3. But hey, that's a flex. And with the amount of receivers that we have on bye, DK in this game with a high over-under, those could be some reasons to start him this week as opposed to in other weeks. On the Baltimore side of things, doesn't look likely that Marquise Brown is going to suit up for the game, which would have been a good opportunity for him. It is the worst passing defense that he would have faced recently, so expect to see a bit more Willie Snead, an increase in production for Mark Andrews, but outside of that, this team's going to get the work done in the passing game through efficiency, not so much volume, and it's not going to likely be enough to start any of these wide receivers. Mark Andrews, though, definitely gets that bump, so if you are an Andrews owner, just something to get a little bit more excited for. But yeah, that's it. Not too much more to go over in this matchup. Bears and Saints, you're starting Michael Thomas. You can start Allen Robinson. I wouldn't be thrilled about it, but there wasn't really any downgrade with Chase Daniels, so long as he produces in the matchup, he's going to get the targets. Anthony Miller, he's been becoming more involved in this offense, but there's really not much upside for anyone particularly in this game, especially considering the projected point total is 38 total points. So expect a defensive showdown, but not much else outside of that. Patriots versus Jets, and the Jets always play the Patriots pretty decently, so I'm just hoping it's somewhat competitive. Patriots are 10-point favorites, of course, but they are lacking some of their best weapons. Josh Gordon, no precise news on exactly what his injuries are, but apparently there are several. Does not sound good for his availability heading into this game, let alone the upcoming weeks, which ties in perfectly with the return of N'Keal Harry, who is someone to keep an eye on. That means Myers, Dorsett, Edelman, those are going to be your main weapons in the receiving game. The Jets' pass defense, pretty solid, but they shouldn't have too tough of a time. You can start Dorsett. That is if he plays. If not, give an extra boost to Myers and Edelman. But this team is definitely getting thin. I'm not sure I'd feel confident starting Myers, but Myers would probably be a pivot if you are having to rely on Dorsett playing on Monday yet or not, and he's a game time decision. Just grab up Myers and play him in his spot if you're forced to have to start either one of them. For the Jets, Robbie Anderson, yet again, can't recommend to start him. His week will come. In fact, trading for him would probably be a good idea. Jamison Crowder, he is a player that has some sort of potential. Again, this pass defense of the Patriots is the best right now in all of football. So for a player who already is borderline spot start, having him in a bad matchup would probably mean to me that I'm trying to find any other option available to me. But that's going to do it. That is all the matchups, guys. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, how would you hit that like button? If you're new to the channel, you should subscribe. But hey, we thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.